What if you were born with nothing, no money, no status, no education, and forced to work 12 hours a day just to survive? Would that be the end of your story? Or could it be the very beginning of something extraordinary? This is the story of Andrew Carnegie, a poor boy from Scotland who became one of the richest men in America and, more importantly, one of its greatest givers. Andrew Carnegie was born in 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland, into a family so poor that hunger was a constant guest at their table. When Andrew was 13, his family emigrated to America in search of a better life. They settled in Pittsburgh, but the reality was harsh. Andrew went to work in a cotton factory 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. He earned just $1.20 a week. His hands were raw, his body exhausted, but his mind stayed curious. He borrowed books from a kind man's personal library because public libraries didn't exist yet. Those books opened windows in his imagination that poverty could not shut. From factory worker, Andrew became a telegraph messenger. He learned to read messages by ear, faster than anyone else. His speed impressed the Pennsylvania Railroad, and soon he was promoted. Carnegie studied relentlessly. Every opportunity, every promotion, every connection became a stepping stone. By his mid-20s, he was investing in ironworks, bridges, and railroads. He had gone from messenger boy to businessman. But his greatest leap came with steel. Carnegie saw that steel could replace iron as the backbone of modern America railroads, bridges, skyscrapers. He poured everything into the Carnegie Steel Company. By the late 1800s, he controlled the largest steel empire in the world. Carnegie, once a penniless immigrant, had become one of the richest men in history. Here's where the story takes a twist. Most men, upon reaching such wealth, would spend the rest of their lives indulging in comfort. But Andrew Carnegie felt something different, a responsibility. He wrote what became known as the Gospel of Wealth. In it, he declared, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced." Carnegie believed wealth was not meant to be hoarded, but to be used for the good of society, and he lived by that belief. Carnegie spent the last decades of his life giving away more than 90% of his fortune. He built over 2,500 public libraries across the world, funded universities, created Carnegie Hall, supported scientific research, and championed peace initiatives. He gave because he remembered. He remembered the boy who had to borrow books because there were no libraries. He wanted to make sure no other child would be locked out of knowledge the way he once was. His legacy was not just in steel, but in minds awakened, lives uplifted, and opportunities created for millions. Experts in psychology and leadership often point to Carnegie as an example of transformational resilience, the ability to take hardship and transform it into a driving purpose. Research on social mobility shows that many who rise from poverty often carry two paths inside them, one of fear and scarcity, another of empathy and giving. Carnegie chose the second. His story illustrates that true success isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you redistribute to empower others. Economists also note that Carnegie's philanthropy helped seed one of America's most important public goods: accessible education. By funding libraries and schools, he expanded opportunities far beyond his lifetime. If Andrew Carnegie's life were a parable, it might sound like this. A poor boy gathers scraps of coal to keep warm in the winter. Years later, he owns mountains of steel and rivers of wealth. But instead of sitting on his treasure, he melts it down, reshaping it into schools, libraries, and halls where music plays. He teaches us that wealth is not the fire you sit beside, the torch you pass on. Most of us will never build a steel empire. But Carnegie's story isn't really about steel. It's about transformation. He teaches us, your beginnings do not define your endings. Struggle is not a prison, it's a forge. Wealth, in whatever form you have, it time, talent, skills, compassion is meant to be shared. In a world obsessed with accumulation, Carnegie reminds us that legacy is built not on what you keep, but on what you give away. Andrew Carnegie's life shows us that greatness is not in rising from poverty to wealth, too is in rising from wealth to generosity. He proved that even the harshest beginnings can end in a legacy of light. So, here's the question for you. What is your wealth? Maybe it's money, maybe it's time, maybe it's your voice or your skills. And more importantly, how will you use it, not just for yourself, but to create opportunities for others? Because in the end, as Carnegie said, the man who dies rich dies disgraced. True success is not measured in what you take, but in what you give. If Carnegie's story inspired you, tap LIKE so this message spreads further. Share it with someone who needs hope in their struggle. And don't forget to subscribe for more Mindshift Stories modern parables that remind us that greatness is not found in comfort, but in the courage to transform. Because sometimes one story is all it takes to change the way we see our own lives.